Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Western U.S. Regional Forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Let's just take a look at our last week here. We're looking at total accumulated precipitation on the left. We had been talking about how Northern California, coastal Oregon, and Washington were really going to get hammered as this strong atmospheric river kind of pushed out of the Central Pacific and took aim there, bringing multiple rounds of precipitation. We can see that some locations were pushing well over 10 inches of accumulated rainfall. This also brought up the snowpack in parts of the northern Rockies as well, as the main trajectory of this flow came in just like this. Now, what it's done is our water year to date, it's actually eroded away some of the deficit that we were seeing in this area, as well as parts of the northern Rockies. So this was good overall for our water picture as we progress toward the end of the season. But the rain that was in Northern California and some of the higher elevation snows, we were already doing just fine in some of these areas. So bringing in a little bit of excess here toward the end of the season. Just to keep you aware, remember that the eastern half of the United States is very, very wet, and we have been so for quite some time. And this is causing some problems for us on the other side of the mountains, which will impact, the agricultural economy for much of the Northwest and for California moving forward. Now, one thing I want to speak about here, and just to reiterate that we talked about last time, is that we know we often have competition between the crops grown in the Pacific Northwest, Washington, Oregon, and in California. And we need separation in the growing season here to get better market play later on in the year. And certainly one thing we have seen is that much of the Central Valley of California has been warmer than average, and also in terms of the progress of spring as projected here by the National Phenology Network, things are early, and this is good. We want to see this compared to the Pacific Northwest. So overall, this is a favorable start to the year. Now, what's going on in the near term? Well, we've got flood watch here for parts of Oregon, and that's because you're going to see here in the short-term forecast, we're going to be adding quite a bit of rainfall to the areas that have already been very wet. When you come down here into parts of Southern California, parts of Nevada, getting over toward the Four Corner states, my big concern here is the risk of fires. Yes, fires already. We have some very, very strong winds, and the fire threat, by the way, is mainly confined to this area, but very strong winds here. And very, very low relative humidities out ahead of this monstrous low pressure system that's going to start here, really getting into parts of Kansas, Nebraska, and then racing toward the northeast. As it goes toward the Great Lakes, we've already got blizzard warnings out in this area, so we're about to put down a huge blanket of snow through a big section of the Midwest, and that's all because of the flow changes we're seeing out in the West. So this is an active pattern moving forward, and we got to diagnose what's going on here. Again, our fire threat, just to show you where that's located, this is from the Storm Prediction Center. They also issue a fire weather outlook. They've got critical across parts of Southern California, but really almost all of Arizona, with an elevated risk covering a huge section here of the country. That critical risk, let me just point this out, is really for this region here and parts of New Mexico stretching into Colorado. And one of the big reasons for this is as this next system gets going right here, we're looking at a map of dew point temperature, and the moisture is going to stay well out ahead of this. And you can see that we're bringing in some very dry air. Dew point temperatures in the single digits, getting in some locations there below zero. So this is some super dry air that is in place, and the conditions there are quite windy. Take a look at what the winds are going to evolve like over the next 24 hours. There's a few important things here. As the system gets going, look at the dry air moving across the desert, and the moisture return just isn't there. So that's why the fire risk is high in this area. But our flow pattern out west is going to change because, as we talked about last time, this ridge was going to be developing out here just off the west coast. And therefore, our storm systems, see them up here? They're going to have to go around this ridge, and they're going to attack the northwest from the northwest, and that's because of the dominance of this ridge. So this is good news for California, drying some things out, but this flow pattern coming in from the northwest is going to at times keep us a little cooler than average, but not too much here for the Pacific Northwest, but very wet because systems are going to run around the northern edge of this. So let's take a look at it, what it means in terms of the upper level flow. Starting us off on Tuesday, this is the upper level trough that's going to sweep through, bringing in some precipitation here in the near term for the northwest and parts of California, but it's the big dog that's going to make for the big problems in the middle section of the country. Now, as that sweeps through, sections of the western United States will get some cooler weather and definitely some mountain snows out of this, but we do see a pretty sizable ridge after this monstrous low makes a huge blizzard in the middle part of the country. Look at the ridge behind it over here in the Gulf of Alaska. That's the ridge creating that big area of higher pressure, sending all of our systems, watch, they're going to go right through the Aleutian Islands. They're going to come right over the top here into British Columbia and then sweep down into the northwest. And with each one of these troughs that does this, we get a cool down here. So this is a weekend, end of weekend cool down for really starting next week that sweeps through. And that's going to be our flow pattern for the foreseeable future, at least in the next 10 days or so. See, I can even take you all the way out to next Friday. So this is 10 days out. And we really just see the dominance of this ridge in this area pushing our systems through the country like this. Once we get out toward the end of April here, things shift around a little bit. We're going to have to talk about that here at the end of this video, though. Okay, let's take a look at what the high-resolution NAM model is picking up on in terms of precipitation. So I'm kind of running you out here hour by hour through Thursday morning. Let's watch this one again. What do we see? We see the first trough sweeping through Idaho, Montana, getting over there into parts of Utah and Wyoming before really ejecting in the Central Plains as a large low-pressure system. Toward the end of this, again, you start to see that our northwest flow comes in just like this with this next system, and that's why we've got a flood watch out for parts of Oregon here. Now, we do want to see this before we get fully into our next growing season. The more precipitation we can be bringing in, the better here for coastal Oregon and Washington, given the deficits we've seen so far this water year. But overall, it's going to be a wet start to, or I should say middle of the week here for parts of the Northwest. California, you're kind of missing out on some of this because of the setup of that ridge out in the Pacific Ocean. And there it is. So as I play this forward, let's just kind of watch these systems curl around this ridge, okay? So I got you out here to midday Wednesday. You see, they just avoid it. They go right over the top. And so it's going to be mostly Washington, Oregon, Idaho. They're going to get the precip out of this. Sometimes in Northern California, get a little bit. But overall, California, your next 10 days or so are much drier than the previous month or so. And you can just see each system coming in right around that ridge, hitting the northwest. So it's going to be hard-pressed to find a stretch of days over the next 10 here in parts of Oregon, Washington, even into Idaho, where we're not going to see a chance at some precipitation. When we put it all together, looking at the next 10 days, like I said, California, much of California is going to stay dry. Coastal Oregon and Washington, that's where much of the precipitation is going to be. But as is very normal, you see here in the rain shadow here in the Columbia River Basin, things are going to stay dry. So thinking about the Tri-Cities there of Washington, Yakima Valley, that area, not going to get much out of this. But with the higher elevations here, Sawtooth Mountains, Northern Rockies, certainly going to be picking up. But the Snake River Valley, overall, relatively dry next 10 days. So that flow pattern's doing something like this. And it's causing the problems to come in from the northwest around that ridge. So look at that Central Valley of California. Our next 10 days, shaping up here to be relatively dry. In fact, much of California relatively dry. Where we're getting flooding, well, here and here. Just to keep you up to date on this, we're dealing with a big blizzard there, right in this section, and multiple rounds of strong to severe storms in the Mid-South and the Mississippi River Valley here, lower Mississippi River Valley over the next 10 days. Checking in on snowfall. Over the next week or so, you can see that we are piling up some snow here in the Cascades. Blue Mountain's picking up anywhere between 8 and 10 inches. But because of that flow coming in like this, we do see that much of the Northern Rockies here, so really parts of Idaho, Montana, add into their snowpack. And that's interesting because they've got quite a bit. You can see here in parts of Idaho, we're at 120 to 150% of normal in some locations. And where we're in deficit on snow, we are at least bringing in some here to parts of the northern Cascade Mountains. So overall, though, our snow picture as we get into spring is looking pretty darn good. Now, we've started off the month on a warmer bias. This is April 1st through April 7th. You can see here much of the west and northwest has been warm. But let's take a look at what temperatures are doing. As we play this forward, we're watching here temperature anomalies every 6 hours. So with the trough that sweeps in to kick off that big blizzard in the Midwest, you can see that we got some cooler weather in Nevada that kind of slides through. But these temperature deviations are really going to be confined to the higher mountainous regions where the trough is established. Much of California, not too big of a deviation. Even Oregon, Washington, slightly cooler than average, even into Idaho, but not much colder than average. We certainly don't see any major frost risk for the Central Valley of California moving through the next 10 days. So we can see again with that trough established there in the middle section of the country for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is where we are here, slightly cooling Intermountain West, but not much of a deviation from normal across the western United States. As we progress into the weekend, again, temperatures really not deviating too far from normal. Just each pulse of moisture that comes in out of the northwest over that ridge does bring in some clouds and therefore some slightly cooler than average weather. But these are not the major deviations we saw throughout much of this winter. So you got some cooler times with this, but this is not the bitterly cold air that we've been seeing throughout much of the end of winter. So I just want to kind of point out our temperatures are pretty darn close to seasonal as we progress forward with a slight cool bias. As we get out longer term, this is just kind of a tease as to what I'm going to be talking about in my long-term model update tomorrow. We do see that by the beginning of May, we do tend to want to build into a pattern that does something like this, kind of split flow. This will tend to keep things drier, but possibly warmer than normal as we get toward the end of April and beginning of May. But we're going to be watching for this to kind of break down as we get into mid-May. And we're going to talk about that in a long-range update that comes out tomorrow. We'll take you all the way out to midsummer with that update tomorrow. So be sure to tune into my.nutrienagsolutions.com. Okay, with that, I'm going to wrap up this forecast video. We at Nutrien Ag Solutions hope you look forward to our next Western Regional forecast coming out soon. Hope you all have a great week, and we will talk to you again later this week. Thank you.